Cardiovascular Institute of the South is celebrating 40 years of delivering health care to our patients and communities. Founded by Dr. Craig Walker in 1983 and guided by a mission to provide the highest quality cardiovascular care available, CIS has pioneered hundreds of firsts to improve outcomes for cardiovascular diseases. Through new technology, virtual care, outpatient procedures, and national growth, CIS is improving lives and leading the way for advanced care and innovation.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Bayou Time. Harry McCullough here. We're going to spend the next couple of segments talking to Representative Garret Graves about a big announcement from the federal government, the disaster reimbursement, $31 million that recently has been reimbursed for our area. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Oh, great to be back with you.
It's jumping in between hurricanes here. I'm sure you're glad to be back in Louisiana.
No doubt about it. It's amazing just being around real people for a little while, normal people.
Well, let's talk about the reimbursement. And I know as we recovered from the storm, when you talk about everybody from the parish presidents to the superintendents of education, they all said we got to do things a certain way because we have to have this reimbursement. So this is a good check to get, I'm sure.
Oh, look, it's huge. But Harry, something that's important to keep in mind, Hurricane Ida was 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Right. I mean, imagine for just a minute if you go out and you go, fix somebody's car, build somebody's house, fix somebody's plumbing, and then they're like, I'll get you a check in 3 years. Yeah. I mean, people can't afford to float that kind of money over that period of time. Again, this cumulatively, we're talking about $31 million. And so what that means is that parishes like Terrebonne and Lafourche are stuck with having to float dollars, having to cover payments, and usually that means you're taking money from something else. So what other government service had to suffer while we waited for FEMA for 3 years to come up and finally reimburse for important things like rebuilding the high school right here in Terrebonne, rebuilding the library in Galliano, refunding some of the funds or reimbursing some of the funds for the South Lafourche Airport. I mean, just really frustrating to see these kinds of timelines.
You do, and look, we all kind of had a time warp here. That was 3 years ago. But South Terrebonne, we had them earlier today at a show, Sports on the Bayou, and they were talking about they just had their gym reopened this week. So the football team can practice there and the volleyball team can play there. So, but that's been 3 years, almost a career in high school that kids have missed, right?
Yeah, and they don't even realize what it's actually like. And so I'll tell you one thing that we did. And they had an inspector general from the Department of Homeland Security that recently pointed this out. There's no incentive for FEMA to ever close these things out. There's no punishment. There's no penalty. There's no incentive for them. They actually went back and found that there was over $70 billion, $70 billion in obligations that were just sitting there within FEMA that weren't being paid, some of them dating back 12 and 15 years prior. And so I'll tell you what we did. We recently passed a bill that actually requires that FEMA pay an interest charge. So if they're going to take 3 years, that's fine. You take 3 years, but you're going to pay an interest charge on your delayed payments. And what that does is it allows parishes like Terrebonne or Lafourche or whatever to either go borrow money from a bank, and then that way when they get paid back, that reimbursement will include the interest payments. But the other thing it does is it begins putting sort of a penalty or an incentive on FEMA to not take 3 years to pay bills like we've seen with this payment.
Yeah, that's incredible. When you think of it that way, when you're a creditor and you're waiting to get paid, it's pretty hard to run a business that way.
It sure
Speaking of FEMA, obviously we had Francine that came through here a couple of weeks ago. Then we got Helene that, jumped Florida somehow and ends up in North Carolina. No, I know it went through Florida. And now Milton is about to hit Florida. And in the middle of that, it seemed like the Homeland Security Office, Mayorkas, says we may be out of money. You were saying there should be plenty of money to go around. That probably was an unforced error, I guess, on his part.
Well, look, number one, FEMA shouldn't be buried within the Department of Homeland Security. It used to be its own independent agency. I think it should be again, and we have a bill to do that. Number two, I want to remind you, Secretary Mayorkas is the same person that's in charge of securing our southern border, and I don't have a lot of faith or confidence in his work, unfortunately. But the third thing is once again, there was just a report that came out that said that FEMA had $70 billion in unliquidated obligations, otherwise said just cash sitting around. And so for them to come out and say that they're out of money or what have you, it's just not true. One, it's you've got to properly prioritize things, and certainly Francine, Helene, and unfortunately, it looks like Milton is going to cause some damages as well. And those are the things that need to be prioritized. Protecting life and getting some of those immediate needs in North Carolina and otherwise are what needs to be done right now. Now, look, the last thing, Harry, that's important to keep in mind is, you've heard these allegations that, FEMA spent $1.4 billion on illegal immigrants. And look, the reality is you go through and add it all up, it's actually over $100 billion, over $100 billion between the cost of things like housing and transportation and food and clothing and medicine for these illegal immigrants. At the end of the day, we've got to prioritize as a nation that our own citizens and our own disaster emergency needs are more important than rewarding folks who illegally came into our country and illegally crossed our southern border. And I have sympathy for these folks. I want them to have a better life, but that is not a fundamental role of government. That's what we need to be doing through our churches, nonprofits, and other groups, not taking our precious government resources and spending them on things like that versus some of the fundamental needs of our own citizens.
Right, which also brings us to the risk rating, right, the 2.0. And if you got that much money, why is all that happening? But yeah, it's a real tough dilemma for sure. And but that's what everybody's talking about now, right? Is how do we manage all of this? You're saying we should be able to get through this hurricane season at least.
We absolutely should. Congress comes back into session in the second week in November, and second or third week in November. And I think that based upon the amount of money that FEMA has in the bank today, that we should be able to cover expenses between now and that period of time. Of course, overall government spending expires on December 20th right now, so we need to come back and address those needs anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you a little more about that. Some good news about Francine, right? Our infrastructure held up pretty good, so we'll talk about that and a little more about your future. We'll take a break. We'll be right back right here on Bayou Time.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health System. Your health is our legacy. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bork, know your rights.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Bayou Time. Harry McCullough here. We're spending a little time with Representative Garret Gray. So we appreciate your time. And we were just talking, the good news of Francine hitting is that Terrebonne Parish, Morgan City, all area seemed kind of resilient, right? Like our infrastructure had been fortified, and we didn't have the damage that we could have had from it directly.
Look, I think a lot of people were expecting Hurricane Francine to have a bigger impact. I would never wish a hurricane upon anyone, and as you know, we did have some pockets with major wind damage, with major flooding. In fact, we spent some time over in Kramer, for example, and had a lot of flooding there. But you're exactly right, and by some estimates, the investments that we've made just in Terrebonne Parish in the Mortgage of the Gulf Hurricane Protection System saved $1 billion in damages, meaning that storm surge, 11 feet of storm surge would have come surging into right here into Houma. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine, even if it had been knocked down by a few feet, 6-8 feet of storm surge in Houma, would have been devastating. Sure. And so, it goes to show that the investments that are being made, the aggressive actions of the Terrebonne Levee District and the parish are paying off. And one of the things we're trying to really educate the FEMA administrator on is that we don't want to be punished for our success, meaning we want you to be here. We want FEMA to be here. We want the Corps of Engineers to be partners with us and continuing to make investments. But just because we didn't flood extensively or entire basins or parishes in Hurricane Francine, that doesn't mean that you you pull back the throttle, you don't get involved, or you stay out. It actually means that, no, we need to double and triple down on the things we've been doing.
Yeah, real good. I want to save a little time and talk about your future. You're not running for re-election this time, obviously. You talked about the Corps of Engineers. You were in line to become head of that department, pretty much. So what's the future? What are you doing?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. I actually brought my resume, and I was going to hold it up for everybody to know. So seriously, I'm not sure yet. I was planning on running again, but when they drew these crazy new maps, it just doesn't make sense to do it. And, Harry, I've always said that I was very hopeful that I figured out when it was time to leave before voters decided it was time for me to leave. And, the last election, we were reelected with over 80% of the vote. It was the highest in the state. And look, I want to keep striving for that last 19% of folks who didn't vote for us. But it's just been an honor doing this for 10 years, representing such a great area of the state and making all kinds of progress on important efforts and projects that are really critical to the Bayou region. And so in terms of what's next, look, I love coastal issues. I love, the coastal restoration, hurricane protection, and flood control type efforts and the mission of the Corps of Engineers. I love working on energy issues and fisheries and things like that. So I really don't know what's next yet, but I will tell you that I will be involved in those issues moving forward just because they're so personal to me, and I love working on them and on some of these priorities for South Louisiana.
Well, look, we get split in half, right? When the Bayou region gets split in half with all of those. I know there's going to be court cases down the road. Do we anticipate anything changes? Because that's also something that's not mentioned nationally, that you got a razor-thin majority in the House of Representatives. And now you got a seat that's just given away basically to, and I don't want to assume that just because it's a majority black district that it'll go Democrat, but it looks like Cleo Fields will probably be the beneficiary of that. Does people nationally talk about that at all? I don't hear it at all.
It is kind of surprising, and it looks a lot like that district was drawn for a specific person, and the thing, when you start putting it all together, so first time in American history, we have a single state that has both the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader. Let me say that again. First time in American history. Right. And this isn't the state of California, or New York, or Texas, or Florida, one of these very populated states. It's Louisiana, right, with a very relatively small population. And the other thing is that the state voluntarily gave away a congressional district that could have been a majority maker. Folks tried to say that courts demanded. That's not true. The court's direction was crystal clear. So it is unfortunate that was done. But I think what's more unfortunate is the way that the maps were drawn. It just splits up and breaks up communities. And I mean, you got a district somebody referred to as the seatbelt district. I was like, seatbelt district? Like, yeah, look at the map. And it does. It looks like a seatbelt going from Shreveport all the way down to, and we laugh, but it's sad, I mean, and you're supposed to do things like communities of interest and compactness and things along those lines. And it's really unfortunate, the gerrymandering that took place. But I'll say it again. I can't look back at it'll be 10 years at the end of this year. I can't look back at anything. And no other word comes to mind other than just the complete honor having the opportunity to represent this area. And, just thinking about some of the stuff we've been able to do, breaking the logjam, getting Houma Navigation Canal authorization for deepening, being able to get the Morganza of the Gulf project after decades of being stuck, breaking the logjam and getting funding for that one, getting the Upper Barataria Hurricane Protection Project authorized, additional funds for Highway 90 upgrades, getting the funds for the new elevated, that last segment of LA1 down from Leeville into Golden Meadow. I mean, just, I could go on, but just, getting the fishing, the red snapper, wrestling control from the feds and giving it to the state of Louisiana, all these things that people here identified as priorities for us, and us being able to finally get those things done. It's just been an amazing opportunity to represent this area in Congress, and I won't look back with anything other than absolute honor and pleasure.
See why your resume was so long when you start doing that. Do we think we'll see a change in the congressional maps?
My gut is there is no way that these maps survive a court challenge. I don't think there's any way at all. So I think, said another way, I think in 2026 in those elections, I think that you'll see a map that doesn't look like you gave a 6-month-old a crayon.
That is a great way to put it. Well, Representative Graves, thanks so much for your service and representing our area. Great, and we appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks, Harry.
All right, we'll be right back with more Body Time right after this.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality.